Today I'm going to talk about the environmental health footprint of food production systems, which is a bit of a change for me. As Liz mentioned, my background's in foodborne disease epidemiology, so I spent most of the last 20 years chasing salmonella through food chains, and now here we are looking at which food production system is best. I'm presenting this on behalf of co-authors, and in particular Jill Hall, who led this project, and Alison Rothwell, who's a PhD student at University of Western Sydney. So this project took place in the Food Bowl of Sydney. Sharon's already mentioned a bit about that. It's an area, the Western Sydney area is suffering increasing urbanisation, both industrial and housing, which has been putting pressure on this highly productive food growing region of New South Wales. Food prices are set to rise, and there's an impact on low SES, as we've already seen. This is obviously set in the context of climate change, with warmer periods and also drier with more extreme events of rainfall. And we're interested in comparing different food production systems. So we wanted to compare environmental and health outcomes across two food production systems. We chose to look at chicken and lettuce, both commonly consumed foods that are probably amongst the most commonly consumed in the Australian household. And our research questions were, was there a difference in environmental impact of 1 kilogram of broiler chicken or lettuce produced for consumption in Sydney by a local industrial or civic food subsystem? And so what was the potential difference from an environmental health impact of both of those food production systems? So when we think about civic, we're thinking small scale, little capital outlay, no employees, it's not profit motivated, it's non-scientific often, simple packaging, local distribution only. So we might be talking about the backyard garden or a community garden. Compared to the industrial, where it's large and industrial in scale, it's capital intensive, it has a complex business plan, it's definitely a profit-making venture. There's a scientific use of logistics, complex packaging, and long distribution chains. So the two types of systems we looked at in Western Sydney, it's kind of hard to find people who actually grow chickens for slaughter in their backyard, but they did manage to find a couple. So we looked at two civic producers of chicken meat. We know that there is some local production in the Western Sydney area, mainly ethnic groups, but an unknown amount. In contrast, chicken meat, which is the most commonly consumed source of protein in Australia, and every man, woman and child eats almost 42 kilos of chicken meat per year in Australia. Clearly some eat more than others. It's a highly concentrated industry, largely being owned by two major operators in Australia, but there are some smaller ones as well. And there has been some suggestion that chicken meat the production of chicken meat is withdrawing from the basin. For lettuce, we know that's commonly grown and consumed in backyard gardens, not only throughout Western Sydney, but throughout Australia. And in fact, 52% of regional backyards have a garden. They may be grown in networks and community gardens, and there's an increase in that type of growing of vegetables. For lettuce, funnily enough, every man, woman and child eats 9.3 kilos of lettuce a year, which is a lot. New South Wales produces 20% of Australia's lettuce, and there's a lot of production in the basin. So to measure the environmental impact, we used life cycle assessment, which is a standard methodology for assessing inputs into a system and consequent outputs in terms of greenhouse gas, water use and land use. So the system boundaries that we included, you have to specify up front what you're going to include and not include. We decided to include production, processing, retail, consumer acquisition and retail. So the data we collected from two civic producers of chicken meat, two civic producers of lettuce, one industrial chicken and one industrial lettuce, was products, land and water use, waste and transport. So we collected raw data from them. We use SEMA Pro, which is a standard package for conducting life cycle assessment, and there's a well-developed literature on using SEMA Pro. And we use it in accord with ISO standard documents. The SEMA Pro contains a lot of secondary data on inputs that you can actually use, and we did use secondary data on some inputs and emissions. And we obviously have to make lots of assumptions in this because they're exceedingly complex systems. And the ANU Ethics Committee approved this project. And this is an example, and I'm not going to ask you to be able to see much of that, but this is just an example of the type of output that SEMA Pro gives you once you put in all your inputs, and essentially the thicker the red line, the greater the influence on environmental footprint you get. And I really can't even read that, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But for civic lettuce production, where for 1 kilogram of lettuce, we estimated that there was between 0.04 and 0.28 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. And the main influences in production of that is car travel and manure use, the type of manure. If you used industrial fertilisers, it's actually there's more carbon emissions. In terms of land use, 78 to 135 centimetres land per year, very small amount. And relatively low water usage. You can see there the main inputs to that being crop watering. For industrial lettuce production, it was much higher than civic. Well, certainly there was only 2 civic, and we were using a case-based study approach. The main inputs to that carbon dioxide production is fertiliser use, using industrial fertiliser, and also tractors, fuel, and other inputs. In terms of land use, 200 centimetres squared of land per year, and the main input here being electricity used for rearing lettuces. Water use, 0.07 metres cubed per year, and primarily due to irrigation again. For chicken, and this was kind of interesting to us, we had about 3.8 to 7.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year in the backyard. Feed inputs were the main source of that, using commercial feeds, and also electricity for egg hatching. In terms of land use, it's a fairly large land use that you require for growing chickens, and you can see we're talking metres squared per land per year here, and the main inputs are the feed inputs that also contribute to that. It's not only what you actually have them running on in the backyard. And 0.17 to 0.32 metres cubed water per year, and irrigation of the feed upstream. So it's an upstream input. Thanks. For 1 kilogram of chicken in the industrial setting, 2.5 kilos of carbon dioxide per year, and largely coming from electricity for egg hatching. 9 metres squared land per year, and major input there is feed. And you can see it's much smaller than for civic, and so is the carbon dioxide there as well. And they've got a lower water use as well, and it's largely again coming from irrigation of feed. So when we compare the results, you can see them there. The key things to note is that civic lettuce production was more efficient than industrial lettuce from what we can see here, but industrial chicken was by far more efficient than civic chicken production. And the main reason is that feed production is very influential, and also the age at slaughter. The chicken meat industry is a highly efficient industry that is vertically integrated and very scientifically based. And the civic systems tend to feed their chickens, backyard growers feed them for longer, slaughter them older, and therefore it's less efficient. In terms of lettuce, civic and industrial are fairly similar. The main inputs being fertiliser, cow manure and tractor use. They could reduce impact by composting and using their own seed, because using commercial seed has upstream influences on carbon dioxide production. And retail and cooking not very influential in the carbon footprint. I think it's also important to realise that while we've done this environmental assessment, there are other considerations, as we've heard before. Resilience and diversity are important, so we wouldn't be saying we should definitely be using commercial chicken production over backyard chicken production. And there's all of these other issues as well, such as biosecurity and animal welfare that need to be considered. So in summary, these were complex models of food production systems, and I've been very reductionist today. We assessed the food contribution to carbon dioxide and land and water use, and we found that industrial chicken meat production was much more efficient than civic, and civic lettuce and industrial lettuce were fairly similar. Producers could reduce the impact by home-produced compost, seed collection, scrap feed to chickens, and using alternative energy sources other than electricity. Just like to acknowledge the following people, and thanks very much.